Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Swift India. It's very exciting to be here. How's it going? Are we having a good time? Yeah, excellent. Let's get started. Thank you so much for having me. My name's not Tim Cook. It's actually Tim Oliver, nearly there. And I'm here today to talk to you about one of my very favorite APIs and how it's very, very important in the current upcoming design trends we have in our iOS at the moment. So as I said, my name's Tim. I'm originally from Australia, Perth, Australia, but I'm actually living in Japan right now, working at Mercari. And Mercari, if you haven't heard of it before, is a customer-to-customer marketplace platform. The idea is if you have something that doesn't really spark joy in your life anymore, you can sell it to someone who might actually get more joy out of it than you do now. So it's a really, really good platform to work. We love Swift. As you can see, I'm wearing a Mercari Swift t-shirt. It says Mercari and Swift in half Japanese and half English. I've been a giant iPhone nerd since the iPhone 3G came out. I can tell you that back then making apps was really, really painful because Objective-C was really old and you had to do your own memory management and property synthesis. We have it so much better now. It's amazing. Granted, iPhones came out a bit after I graduated from university, so the first half of my career was I was actually a web developer, and then I actually transitioned into being a full-time iOS developer back in 2013. And as has been said, I love open source software. I like rewriting all the UI views that Apple should have given us, but they didn't. There's been a few users in here I found out already, so I'm really happy to see that. I also love video games. Splatoon's my jam at the moment, and I do love karaoke. It's a very, very serious thing in Japan. So, does anyone remember iOS 6? A few? 3, 4, okay, let's go, that's a good number. It's kind of amazing that it's been so long, but iOS 6 to 7 was a very, very jarring transition, but we went from this design scheme of skeuomorphic metaphors of UI components to a very, very light, minimal, barely nothing there sort of mosaic. But since then, it's actually been, iOS itself has been evolving very gradually over the years, and as of iOS 13, we've actually got a lot more cool looking kind of design elements. For example, back in iOS 7, all the action buttons were a single point thick, and they're very, very light in area as a result. But gradually over the time, over the development of iOS, more and more action buttons have started to get this new design trend of rounded and more thick, and yeah, basically not 1 point anymore, but maybe 1.5 to 2 points. And everything's just made a lot more rounded off, which really shines on the high-res Retina devices of the current, high Retina displays of the current devices. Tab bars in iOS 11 became really, really different. They stopped being hollow and filled and just went from filled and again a lot more thicker, and now the color just changes. But that's a small thing, but it actually again looks really nice, and again looks really, really nice on Retina devices. iOS 11 also brought this new concept of large titles, and when it was announced, Apple said this was a concept called wayfinding. The idea is you can set basically where is the root of your app, and now it's very, very obvious. And I didn't like it at the beginning. I was like, that's a lot of wasted space, but now I really love large titles. And something that came really recently with the unveiling of iOS 12.2 or something, when the new wallet app came out, is this new concept of not using separator lines to actually separate your content. It's using differences in color. For example, now we have table view cells that don't actually go edge to edge, but they actually just use the difference of white and gray to create a contrast. But by far the biggest evolution has been that iOS 7 went from this very, very square, angular sort of design language, and over the years we started seeing more and more rounded corners. So as you can see, the iTunes or the Apple Music app, in that all the album art went from square to very, very rounded, and this has been happening over and over and over a number of years. But obviously it became really obvious when the iPhone 10 came out, because that thing suddenly made sense. Suddenly now that we have rounded devices, it behooves us that our UI also contours to that metaphor of the actual physical form of our devices. And as you can see, now that whenever Apple releases new apps now, they have this very, very minimal but very nice sort of layout where every single piece of media is rounded. And this is all made possible with one of my very favorite APIs, well, one of my favorite APIs, there's a lot of APIs, and that's the corner radius one. That's a property of view.layer. I don't have a lot of time to talk about what layers are, but just as a quick background. The layer property of UI view is a CA layer, and that's actually the component of core animation that actually handles the rendering. So the UI view is all the UI kit goodness, things like touch recognition and gesture recognition, auto layout, and even a better animation API. But CA layer is actually where all the goodness happens. And I did talk about this at a Try Swift conference a few years ago. I think the video's on the internet around somewhere if you'd like to have a look. But I was kind of curious. I was like, why do we go from square to rounded rectangles? Traditionally, corner radius is very heavy, and you should have avoided it. But suddenly something changed. And now suddenly it's okay to use it like obscenely everywhere, like without any regard for performance. So I was very lucky to get a ticket at WWDC 2018 last year. So I went, and I had 10 minutes to get to the co-animation lab, so I just ran in like a madman and went, why has iOS gotten so rounded? And they were like, well, it's basically, it was thanks to Metal, because iOS 11 was the first version of iOS that dropped OpenGL. Every device that runs 11 is Metal supported. And because they were able to make Metal from the ground up, they were actually able to consider corner radius in the production of Metal, and were able to make it, in their words, practically free. Not completely free, but basically free. And I was like, whoa, that's cool. I'm going to try and make a project about this. So I sat down, and this is kind of what I look like when I code, like, yeah. I sometimes Twitch stream my coding as well, but trust me, it's incredibly hard to keep people entertained while you're coding. And I came up with this little thing. It's a button, nothing too crazy. It's a rounded button. Its name is TO rounded button. It's not a subclass of UI button. It's a subclass of UI control, and everything that's button related is what I implemented myself. So I basically tried to make this as performant as possible by doing two code paths. So the button has two code paths. One is the opaque one. If you know what the color of the background is, it just generates a bitmap, a rounded corner bitmap with the background color and the button color, and then makes that an image view at the back. And that's obviously very, very performant because now you're not even dealing with corner radius. It's now just a static image that looks like corner radius. And then if it's a clear button, so if there is a background that's poken through that needs to be updated dynamically, then what it does is it replaces that image view with just a flat view, and then there's a container view containing all of this stuff, and that has corner radius applied to it. And I put it out and said, I made a button, and I think it's really, really performant. And everyone on Twitter was like, wait, why? And I was like, oh, okay, I'm getting called out now. So this was my mindset. Because, so when you're doing iOS, like laying out layers, or views, layers on iOS, basically they have two modes. There's an opaque mode, which means that it knows it doesn't have to blend anything, it doesn't have to do any blending with the content behind it, so it just slaps it onto the screen. But if there is like a transparent image or something like that, it needs to go through every pixel and do like an alpha pass to make sure that the content behind pokes through. And this is really easy to see in the simulator because you can just go up to debug and say click color blended layers. So my goal was to try and avoid red, like it's red if it's transparent and green if it's opaque. And I had this mindset because I came from the dark ages when Steve unveiled the very first iPad. Boy, that was great. But that thing was very different to the devices we have today. And any kind of red layers when you're doing scrolling was detrimental to performance. Like you could guarantee 60 frames of performance if every single layer you had was green. So I've had this mindset ever since then. But I was like, maybe I'm stuck in the past like an Objective-C dinosaur. So let me see if this is actually true. So I was very lucky again to get a ticket this year. I'm pretty sure that's all my luck for the ticket lottery done at this point. But I went back, and this time I actually went to the co-animation lab and spent a lot of time asking them. I went in and went, I made a button. Did I do a good job? And they went, no, whoa, no, that's no. And I was like, oh, well, now I have a talk to talk about now. And now I have a conference talk to talk about. But they were very lovely, and they went through and they were very, very deep about how corner radius works. And I'm very happy to try and to show you what I learned here now, because this is hopefully very, very important, really good stuff to know, and there's no documentation about it online anywhere. So the very first thing they said was my opaque path, where I generate a bitmap using core graphics and set that to the background. They were like, that is completely pointless. Never do that, please. Oh no, that is every performance gain you get, you've sacrificed so much everywhere else. The reason for that is, obviously, images on iOS are a big deal. To generate an image, you have to allocate the memory, you don't have to do the render pass, and then you actually get to the point where corner radius comes in, so to the actual rasterization point. So, and the problem is if you have multiple buttons and you don't do any caching, you're actually generating more and more memory consumption. So they basically said, just don't do that. Just everything, don't try and use the CPU when a GPU is sufficient. It's probably a really good way to go into that mindset. So the next one was, basically what he said was, I was on the right path, but the thing is, you probably shouldn't put corner radius on the container and clip every single view inside the container, because what that is doing is that's creating what's called an off-screen render pass, which means that the GPU didn't have enough information, so I had to go back to the CPU, do some recomposing, and then send that back. And traditionally this has been quite slow, but again, they said that they managed to optimize it quite well in iOS that it's not as bad as it used to be, and I'll talk about what that means. So when you go into the simulator, you can say debug color blended layers and see which layers are being blended, and that's good. And you can actually go color off-screen rendered, and as you can see, the corners are being rendered. It used to be only color off-screen rendered yellow, but now they said if we can find out a more optimal off-screen render pass, the actual highlights will be green instead of yellow. That means it's still not as good as what you could possibly have, but it's actually still good enough that that's actually acceptable. If it's yellow, you should try and avoid yellow at all costs. If you turn this on, you see your app is very yellow. Also be warned that on the simulator on the real device, sometimes the entire screen is yellow. You might have some work to do. So this is actually, they said, don't do this. This is not the way to do it. Basically what they said is all you need to do is instead of clipping the container view, all you should do is just clip the background view. So just apply corner radius to the background view. It's still a flat UI view, nothing else. And the good thing is when this happens, Metal is smart enough to apply a shader to it, and it just does this corner radius on the GPU. So this is really, really efficient. It's using the performance of Metal, and that's why they say it's practically free. So this is what they've told me is the best way to do it. The thing is though, let's have a look. The thing is though, even though they said that was the wrong way to do it, I was also skeptical. I was still skeptical because, again, I was coming from the mindset, I was like, oh no, red is bad. Because when you do this, obviously now that Metal had to clip the corners, now it's become a transparent view, so now it's become red. And I was like, is that, so actually, the guy was very, very kind and let me tweet at him, and I was like, are you sure this is the right way? And he said, yes, absolutely, I'm sure. Because what actually happens is, off-screen render passes are still very heavy, even on today's modern devices. But GPUs have gotten to the point now where basically alpha blends are basically free. Like you don't have to worry about them too much. So in this grand scheme of things, having a red background view instead of an off-screen render background view that is not red is actually better. So another thing that they actually pointed out, which I'd never actually realized, is I said before in that example, you set layer.cornerRadius and layer.masterBounds. You don't actually have to set master bounds on just flat views. If it's just a color view and no image content, you don't have to set master bounds. Because master bounds is usually what causes the off-screen render pass. Because that's suddenly saying like, okay, now I have to worry about content being clipped when it leaves the bounds of this view. I noticed a very interesting quirk. You have to turn master bounds on for image views, but even if you turn it on and leave the image view empty, the image view will still be a red transparent layer as opposed to off-screen rendered, which means if you set master bounds to yes and corner radius on an image view, that's still fine. It's still the most performant way. And here we go. And this is really cool. Like once you start to see this in action, you can actually start noticing how Apple have actually done this in apps that use corner radius a lot, especially like the App Store, because it's actually really fascinating. They've optimized this thing incredibly well. As you can see, you can like only one element's actually being clipped here, like really clipped, and that's the video. And obviously that's necessary because it's a video, not just a flat image or a view. But everything else is just a corner radius image or a flat view. And the nice thing about iOS 11 is there's actually an API that lets you set which corners are rounded, which ones aren't. So you can see in things like the one on the side here, the top corners are rounded and the bottom corners are rounded, but the ones in the middle aren't rounded. And that makes it, and that is just really easy to do without having to do any view composition. They're just two views sitting on top of each other. Another thing that's really cool is the one in the middle is actually animated. The icons are scrolling across. And you assume that means that because they're scrolling across, they need to be clipped by the bottom. But as you can see, Apple has very cleverly made the bottom of that scroll view just above where the view starts to round. So you can actually get away with having a rounded view, and it looks like it's being clipped, but it's done in such a way that if you insert your content just enough that you're not overlapping the corner bit, you can get away with not setting master bounds, and you can still get the best performance. And then obviously, like it's not the end of the world if you have to do actual clipping. The idea is you should try and avoid it if necessary. But here is a video being played in the App Store, so that actually makes sense that it's clipped. But as you can see, this is the sort of like kind of optimization that Apple's done, and everything has been well calculated. So, what about UI button in the end? So I basically went back and I was like, okay, so I spent like a week writing my own button, and I streamed it on Twitch, and it was actually good. I had some friends with backseat coding. They were like, no, you shouldn't use UI button, use UI control. So having a bunch of iOS engineers like watch over your shoulder while you're engineering is really interesting on the internet. So here's the normal UI button, and I applied corner radius to it, and this is what you get. So actually, if you just put corner radius on UI button, and because UI button is just a flat view with no container view or anything, the content inside is rounded and not off-screen rendered, so this is actually fine. So I learned a lot. Going full circle is kind of like, okay, actually just applying corner radius to UI button is fine. But in the process, we learned a lot, got a good chance to go talk to the core animation engineers, and overall, it's very good to know exactly why something is like that, and this is one of the greatest opportunities to do that. And at the same time, like people are like, did you regret making that button? I'm like, no, absolutely not, because the great thing is when you roll your own controls, you get your own ultimate control. And so I was actually wanting to add other effects that aren't possible with UI button very easily. Things like when you tap the button, it actually shrinks a little bit, and the text changes color. And I'm actually thinking about doing new things now that UI button just cannot do, like putting in an animating view into the button. So it's very good that in terms of open source software, if you have the time to spend, like this probably would have been unacceptable if I was on a tight deadline and a budget, because I just wasted a bunch of time when a normal controller would have done the job. But in my free time where I like to hack and tinker, this is really good fun. And basically, so the reason why I built that button originally is I'm now making an open source library right now called FileKit, and the idea is you can just sign up any of your remote accounts like Dropbox or Google Drive, and then download files to your iOS device. And I just knew I'm going to have like buttons everywhere, so I actually built the button for that there. And I just thought I'd talk about some of the lessons learned I learned from this process of making this button and going to WWDC, and basically how I'm using them to improve myself now. Times change. Hardware gets better. We're not running code on iPad 1s anymore. We're not running code for iPhone OS 3.2. Software and hardware gets better over time. That's just a matter of fact. So as a result, what you might have thought is best practice at one point isn't actually best practice anymore. So it's very easy to get stuck in this mindset of like going, no, this is the way we should always do it. But you should always be asking questions. You should always be wondering, like, is this best practice? Or even in the case of what we're doing right now, is it best practice what we're doing at this point? And I'm of the opinion, because I see this a lot in the work I do, a lot of people would just, because they're on a tight deadline or a budget or whatever, they will just throw in a UI button into a storyboard and then apply corner radius to every single one. And I feel like that's an okay job, and that's fine if the constraints are there, but if you have the time, if you're doing this for fun or as like a project and you want to do a really good job, I feel like it's better to do a fantastic job once and reuse that control once than do an okay job every single time you need it. Another interesting fact is a lot of people are saying, like, why did you actually go over the top and like try and make it as perform as possible? And I think the reason for that is when you do open source software and you're designing software that could be possibly plugged into absolutely anything, it kind of behooves you to make sure that you have the best product you can. So if someone drops my button into a library and now it's my button's fault, the whole thing just lags down, that's not good. That's a terrible open source project. Someone should file a pull request for that. The idea is, if you have all the time in the world and you can refine it and practice it, and you don't know what the requirements are, you should try and do the best job that you can. But at the same time, we're all professional employed developers here, and that is sometimes not acceptable when you actually have a deadline. So the idea, but the thing is, you might also want to be aware of, is to avoid premature optimization. So the fact is, if you do have a very set scope of an app that runs in a specific context, you should just, at the very least, like just get the oldest device you plan to support it on, and just run it on that. If you get a full 60 frames on that, and if it runs perfectly and there's no slowdown, then you're fine. You don't have to do any more work. Anything more than that is just going over the top and possibly a waste of time and money. So, and there's just one more thing. This is by far my favorite announcement that happened at WWDC. Xbox support for the iPhone was good too. SwiftUI is okay. No, that's good. Yeah. Sorry, I'll make a lot of enemies saying that. No, SwiftUI is incredible. I cannot wait for that. So before iOS 7, there was this concept of rounded corners, which was just, you have a square, you cut out the corners and put a quarter of a circle in there. And then when iOS 7 came out, Apple brought out this new concept of a thing called a super ellipse or a squircle. You can pick whatever you want to call it. I like squircle. It sounds like a Pokemon. And all it is instead of it being like a very hard rotation in, it's actually, the curve starts a lot more gradually. As you can see, it's only like a couple of pixels worth of difference, but it's very, very visible once you start to see it more commonly. It's definitely more visible on the ultra-high retina devices we have now. And this has been an API since the beginning, but Apple's been hoarding it for themselves. So up until now, when you use corner radius, you only get the pre-iOS 7 icon style, and that looks kind of janky compared to Apple's ones. But finally, in iOS 13, they made it a public API, which means that now, every time you set a corner radius, you can just set the corner curve to continuous, and by doing that, now you'll get the nice iOS 7 sort of super ellipse rounding. So I definitely recommend that if you are using corner radius, you definitely put this API in. It does not work in Xcode 10. You have to do like a macro saying like if SDK version is greater than Xcode 10. But I'm so excited about this because I feel like the quality and the visual look of a lot of iOS apps is going to go up now that this is publicly available to us. So yeah, I was really, really excited about that. And yeah, that's all I have. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for having me. It's been my first time in Bangalore, and I've had such a great time. Thank you so much for having me.